You can't both hit that button at the same time. I think that was the problem.
Oh, you know what it did is in preparing for it, in preparing for the show, I turned off the looping, and then I think by rote you probably turned it back on.
Because I knew I had to hit the loop.
Like just out of habit, you click the one you turn, because for us, we turn looping on for one thing and turn it off for something else, and so there's a habit of just click, click. Yeah. And I think I had already gone through that, and then you started the show, so we heard ourselves there. So, anyways,
welcome. It's Monday.
Yeah. Well, see, it's Monday, June 23rd.
These things happen. That's it.
Of 2025, and we're here on the Dev Talk Show. Good morning, Rich.
Morning, Chris. Good weekend, sir.
Yeah, I think so. We are heading into a heat wave across most of the United States, and it looks like it's going to hit us pretty hard too. So much for spring, I guess. I mean, I don't feel like it lasted that long. I feel like winter, meaning cold, we didn't get like snow or anything. I feel like winter went on a little bit longer, and then we finally got into some nice 70s where, let me just open the windows all day, and man, let me close them as fast as I possibly can.
Yeah, so, it was nice, like some of those lighter temperatures, but it was just a lot of rain here too, which was needed, but it's not necessarily post-spring, right? That's all the April stuff, not the May stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. So on this episode of the Dev Talk Show, we have been trying to learn about and promote and learn and try best practices for building applications, or seem to sort of stumble into them by building an application to manage a user group. And today, something we've neglected for a while is the application is using Azure Cosmos DB and the MongoDB. How do I say that correctly? Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB, or
no? Actually, it's the SQL. We're using the SQL.
Oh, no SQL. That's right, because they're different. They're different, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Azure Cosmos for NoSQL. I always think of it as like an interface. I don't know if that's the right terminology, because you can have Azure Cosmos DB represented in traditional SQL terms as well,
right?
And some other, like, I don't want to call them metaphors, because that would imply, and I think I'm right about this, that would imply that when you pick one, you could use a different interface to talk to that container, and that's not true.
That's not true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
like
if you
pick the path, you go down the path. Yeah.
Right. So when you think about when we talk to and we get data out of Cosmos DB, it's actually the SQL connection that we're using, because we see select star blah blah blah, right?
Right.
Versus there's a separate one for a Mongo type connection. And
right.
Grab,
yeah.
There's a third as well, or a fourth as well.
Right. And so I think the correct term is Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL. And the only reason I point that out is because if you're brand new to Azure Cosmos DB and you see all these different things like for NoSQL, for Mongo, that it can lead you to believe that, are these just interfaces to the same backend store? And that's not true. The container is the road you're walking down. And I think it's at the container level, right?
Yes.
So, or is it at the database level?
Sorry. Yes, it's the database.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, because I'm just throwing things out there, not having used it as much. So I'm learning, right?
Yeah.
You've got
exactly.
And one of the things is we have a very basic data model just for meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And so for
get
people
it up and running, right?
Yeah, it's up and running. And so for people watching, I think, and I've had plenty of people who've either commented to us, reached out to us directly. They actually kind of like the episodes where they don't feel like they have to watch the screen, because then they say, hey, I could listen to it on the train. So while there will be some screen sharing today, the plan is to talk about some options for the data model, and also where there's some nice correlation, maybe even a confluence with schema.org.
Mhm.
So I suppose the first place to start is, what is schema.org?
Yeah, so we could probably switch to my screen if you
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. And you know, I was vaguely aware of schema.org. As much until we started looking at it here. So this is not the same thing as a JSON schema.
No, this is actually a. Going to bring you in so we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually as it says there, a collaborative community around having structured data on the internet. So if when you go to a web page, there is some machine readable, I guess probably the best way I would classify it, way of looking at that data and understanding that there is some context that you can associate with it. And it's a, it is something that was started by, kind of the big players at the time around what that data looks like and what kind of properties should be included in there and how those properties should be structured. And I think one of the things in kind of rolling through and looking at this, it is more of a front end capability than it needs to be a back end data store capability. Now, you need to have all those properties in your data store, but the structure that's defined here is more for the front end side of and presentation side of things. So almost thinking this as like a view model without, having that structure and having, your backend database, what we're going to store in Cosmos DB, just be the model component. And I'm using this as a way of defining some common properties that we definitely want to make sure get included in an event, so that if there are some things that we take advantage of by having the presentation layer include that schema structure, I think that's what we'd want to maybe take advantage of. So if we look at the possible schemas that are here, there's, we can look at everything that's possible. If we go out to, a full list of all of the types, where, there are actions, there are things in the biochemistry world, in the medical world, things related to organization and persons and places and products. But I think where we typically are going to focus here is really around this event capability. And even within event, it gets very specific around, well, what type of event is it, right? So there, you can see this at least a dozen, almost 24 different types of events that are possible. So because of that, you can get very specific on what you're looking for. Now, I don't see anything in here that looks like a community type event. We could probably, maybe, social event is something that might be something to think about. Or what's the other one that I was thinking that might possibly, almost like a course instance, right? Because we're these things are presentations. They're not just social gatherings, even though it's a good portion of it. So I don't see anything that definitely pushes us down an event, but I think just having a base event, at least at this point, is kind of what I'm leaning towards. What we can look at those. So I said a lot there, and it's only been a couple of minutes, so I'm sure there are questions. Or not.
Yeah, I think I did the same thing, saying, is there a sub event that makes sense? The closest I came to, and then I personally kind of rejected, was the education event. But then I thought, that's like almost too, it's almost too specific. Yeah. Because I think if you look at it, there's really just a speaker talking, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we would be able to fill out a lot of these like properties anyway, because there's, right, for example, just those properties you're looking at right there, there's not going to be an assessment we're not necessarily talking about education levels that we could point to in a particular curriculum. Like we could say, oh, we feel this is kind of like 200 level, but what does that mean? We don't have a specific curriculum. And so anyways, the point was, is that it seemed too specific. We have a speaker. So
that's kind of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only thing that kind of makes it more of a presentation and than anything else. So if we look at, and you can see what's cool about even with these, you know, we go back and look at that education one, you can see that, hey, it still includes, you know, the properties from the event, but hey, here's a whole bunch of extension properties, if you will, that are related to another event, the education event, and we can basically bring them both together into that event entity type.
I think the other thing that happens here is if we dug a little deeper, you could start to correlate things. For example, they have an example which I was trying to point to. When you're on the event page, so when you're on the event page there, you know,
and scroll down.
Scroll down a little bit to where you can see the examples.
Yeah.
The first example is there, and again, they start off in their examples, it's tabbed, as you can see, right?
Yeah.
And the first tab is, this might be your HTML of just me. You just have a web page of like, oh, hey, we have an interview with the Foo Fighters, and the web page itself, this is an expression of the data, but it's not how you would present the data. So when I walked over to the JSON LD one, just because, not because there's anything wrong with the other formats, just I thought this was quickly, easily readable, is what I thought was interesting is like you could have this overall context is that this is about a music group, but it's an event, and here are 2 upcoming events. And then as you scroll down a little bit more, it referenced a specific recording or recordings. And then furthermore goes on to say that the Foo Fighters are the subject of a video.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I felt like interesting that you could kind of bring all this together, I think, and say, and that's probably where the education event would be more useful, is that you would say like, okay, well, this is an event and it's an educational event and it covers these topics, which are other things in schema.org, I believe. And so looking at this, I feel like, okay, I don't know that we need it to be this, like, I don't know that we're necessarily looking for this level of complexity, but there are some things that I think will be useful.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Sorry, just turning off Teams. Just in case. Yeah, so I totally agree. So we can basically, pick and choose the things that we want to include here, and define, by having, I guess, this context bit at the top of saying, hey, this is all related to schema.org objects, and then being able to say, well, here's a number of types that we're going to define. We can include different components, right? So here's, like you said, the events, the images, the video recordings, and maybe we start to splice those together. And I think maybe we can certainly look at something like, hey, here's a social event, right? Where we've got things like, an actor, we've got, potential audience, or I don't know. I know we call them speakers, but
they have actor and performer.
Yeah, performers,
right?
Probably.
I agree that we so badly want it to be like a speaker, but it's just not.
And that's
got to be okay.
Right. I mean, to the point of, underlying in the data, when you have it in that JSON object, yes, it probably is going to need to stay a performer so that the machine reading of that understands it. But there's no reason that we couldn't label it as.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So the other thing that's interesting here is that came out of this that I never thought of. We to use Philly.net specifically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Philly.net's been using various sites and means to promote this stuff, and we often have two speakers. One will have an hour one, and then we'll have a short break, and then we'll have an hour two. And what really happens is they just get sort of mushed together, and it's fine. Like, it's never been a problem. But this event schema supports the idea of sub-events.
Yes. Yeah. Having that as a tag there, and then since everything that's in here that we're looking at is all part of the larger event object. There, if you have a sub event, then an event actually could also be a super event, right? So the parent of that sub event. So those things kind of run together. And that's why in here they actually call them an inverse property, right? So you have an inverse property of a sub event being a super event, and a super event being the inverse property being the sub event. So it is interesting when application developers try and talk about data and data structures and all of those things that we have to consider, that we would just get it on the front page. It's fine. Or just put it in the database, like, it'll be fine.
Yeah, and that's, to our detriment, I think. But the data store is not just a place to store stuff. That's the thing I try to keep telling myself, because then it starts to look like maybe my garage or something, and then your data team gets really upset, and I don't blame them.
Yes.
So I'm very sympathetic.
So I think what we want to do is, unless there is something overwhelmingly interesting, and this is the only thing that makes a difference here, is the course thing at the beginning, and I don't think they have an instructor, which is the only thing that might push us in that direction to include that. But I think if we maybe start with this schema of an event and these properties that are here for the event, and maybe just basically grab all of them, drop them in a markdown page, and say, all right, what are the ones that we want to keep? So we can say, hey, this is the subset of event that we're using inside of our application. Does that sound like a good?
Yeah.
Is to start, or is that too? Okay.
There's another point to this, and to be fair, I don't know how this is going to look, but we know for sure that there are webmaster guidelines to mark up your site using these micro formats, right? JSON LD, the HTML, and I don't know if you have a link to this. For one thing, I can put it in the chat, right? But oops, maybe I can. Maybe I need to type there. But I'm just going to send you a link real quick. But it talks about how marking up your site with structured data can allow users to make decisions. And here's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that the way this is supposed to work is if Philly.net were to have an upcoming session on web APIs with minimal APIs or something, and then I happen to, maybe I live in the area, and like, say Bing knows that, and I type minimal API documentation or something, is it going to grab that event that it's crawled and say, well, this person's searching for something similar, why don't they clearly want to learn about this, why don't I show the event? I think it would be amazing to see that all work.
Right.
But I don't know how you enable it. Like, I don't mean enable. Somehow you have to end up in the search result.
Yeah.
And I mean, one is enabling it. Yeah.
Yeah. The site's got to get crawled, and then those results have to wind up in a place that when you search for it, those can get included in there. And I think regardless of whether you're using Bing or using Google, there are some things to keep in mind, as you mentioned, for the folks who are doing that and being able to get those into the site. And I think that might be the goal, but I think it's a longer term goal than just getting the data structure in there now. But I think it's something we need to mention now and be aware of, and be able to. I think if I paste. Yeah, so I know you pasted those links in the comments, but this is kind of what it's looking like. How do we go ahead and mark up our site so that we can take advantage of those things that are there, and then be able to pop when people go ahead and search for those things. So those, I think that's a future thing that we definitely want to do, and part of the reason why we're doing this. So
right. Well, so what I'm thinking is that, and when you look at how you include it on the page, is you include a script tag with the type, and if you use JSON LD, then you use a script tag with that type. And so that sounds to me like a Blazor component that emits it invisibly to the the person viewing the page. They don't know it's there, but the web crawler sees it.
Yep.
So
to your point, right? We've got that script tag here as an opening, and then all that content that we've seen above in those properties listed through the rest of that tag component.
Yeah, and so I think that's a future. To me, that feels like a Blazor component that knows how to emit that. So, and then when you view a list, as far as perhaps our front page is a list of the next so many upcoming events, and the web crawlers come along, hit the homepage. Oh, look, there's a list of events in here. Let me just hang on to that, and that's it. So,
yep, awesome. Okay, so if we go back to what we were thinking of, I don't see an easier way to do this other than to say, that's the thing. I don't know. Is this? Well, at this point, it's even if it's Markdown. At this point, it's HTML, right? There's no way to get.
To turn that directly into Markdown. That sounds like that would be an incredibly awesome extension that I'm not saying exists, but it might. Something that. But no, you're right. Is that? Do you want to link to this, or do you want to actually have our own table?
I think I want to bring this right now into a Markdown file in the project.
Okay.
And sorry, I was doing some exploratory work earlier, but here we go. We switched. Yep, we're in the a data modeling branch. And let's go ahead and get rid of all of these. Close them all. We don't have a docs folder in here yet,
no,
do we?
We don't. And
probably,
I think that's an interesting point too, is that there's a couple things that we will probably restructure. I feel like, and I don't know if I can say that this is like fully standardized, but I feel like there's a lot of teams that have adopted a folder structure, a standard folder structure where the source is like an SRC.
Yeah.
The docs are either in doc or docs. There might be a samples folder, and so on. And right now, our root is the source, which is probably fine for now, but we could change that later. But no, we don't have a doc or docs folder.
Okay. We can do that and maybe certainly start one, or we can just leave this at the root. I'm fine either way. Probably.
I think it's probably time to start a doc folder. There's a lot of documentation we should really be getting in here.
I would agree. So let's do that. Let's come in here and then say, hey, bring that in a little bit so people can see. Let's get rid of my Copilot chat because that was a thing I was working on. But here, yeah, let's do this here. And this is MD. So there's that. I'm just going to take a look and see if
Oh, look at that.
that's interesting.
Hold on. While you're looking at that, I'm gonna try to give it a roll here. I don't know if you have live share enabled.
I can. I know.
Yeah, just because if I happen to get lucky on this while you're looking, then they'd say, okay.
Live share, right? Let's install that.
Yeah, right. Hopefully this doesn't take you too long, because I think you the next step is usually having to log in.
Yeah, may want to.
If not, I could always paste it into chat too. So
Yeah, but I think I'm going to switch just to us because
okay.
I don't want the right link being.
Yep, I gotcha.
I would already copied the link to the clipboard, so now I can do this and come over here. And in the comments, no, not in the comments. Sorry. Filters. Better. Okay. So that should work for you now, hopefully.
Okay.
I'm kind of watching down here in this section down here where that's where the live share number of people will be there. There's also the shared notification here. So we've got a couple things on my screen which you're not seeing. So let's do this to bring it back down here at the bottom. These are things that keep an eye on when you're doing the live share stuff. So
yeah. So in any case, like we said, schema.org has these various standard ways to mark things up, I suppose. And we're thinking that it could be the basis for our data type.
This might be a good. It's got almost 6,000 people using it. Average 3 of 5. I mean, the other thing is we could just what?
No, I think it's funny how we're trying to judge, like, how do we all judge what we think, how we think an extension is it good? Well, how many people are using it? What are the stars like? I mean, it's crazy I think the kind of world that we're living in here.
So, I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I just pasted it into the chat. Or I just pasted it live. So I stopped that session. We're going to start a new one.
Okay. Well, I mean, we don't have to worry about it either. It's okay.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good way for us to collaborate on this. So I just have to, let's see, go back to here. Let's copy this. I'll go back to here. Paste it. There we go. That's interesting. It is all text. So if I take that file and say, hey, can you... Interesting. Hang on 1 second. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. Notepad. No, it is just text. Okay, good to know. You can write this text into a markdown table. Paste done the 3 columns in the first line.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying is like, can we get this
Yeah.
can we get this to be converted for us?
Exactly. And I was in ask mode, not agent mode, because it probably would have just gone ahead and done it. So maybe we stop that. Do the little, just like you can do in the command line, do the tag up or arrow up. Drop my prompt back in there again and let it go ahead and do that. So cool. So that we'll at least get those in, and then we can kind of walk through and see the ones that we want. Perfect. It's taking them a section at a time so that it can make sure that it does it the right way, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I tried using that extension.
What'd you think?
And it seems okay. It's okay. I mean, it created some tables, I can tell you that. So I'm just impressed that it did as well as it did.
Do they look like this?
I'm not seeing your screen right now.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, something like that, basically.
Cool. So I think what we want to do, it's still thinking. So
yeah, so the way this extension works is you create an HTML file, or at least you have an HTML file on your system. And then as part of the command palette, there is now adds a few new it adds a few new commands to convert HTML to Markdown, PDF. It looks like it supports Excel and Word. And then you run it, and what it does is it creates a file like alongside it. And sure enough, it created a Markdown file. So I don't know. That's cool.
That is pretty good. But I mean, I would have to have the HTML, and when I copied it, just copied the text from the looks of it.
Right.
So I dropped it in Notepad.
Right. So while you were there working, I opened the source and I like grabbed the table out of it.
Nice.
So I'm not trying to say that was easy, but it even created the extension will create a PDF. That's cool. All right. So
I think we're almost
link
done
to
here.
that extension in the show notes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's next after that. So what's next is, because we've gotten a little off track, and not really off track. So we have an inspiration for I don't think you're saying that we would implement every data field, and I don't think you even have to, right?
Right.
As far as schema.org is concerned, you don't have to. But this would be modifying our meeting class to look more like this. Perhaps we would find now we're also creating new classes to hold other object types. And then we would start working with that thing instead.
Right.
There may be some incompatibility. We might find there's some incompatibility with our current meeting type. So I guess that would probably be a database reset. Or let me ask this: how, with the NoSQL databases, would we handle something like version data where, and I don't know if we have to solve this problem right now, but you're down the road, you're 2 to 3 years down the road, and then you decide, hey, we want to make some fundamental changes to our data model. I feel like there is a possibility that you could version the data in a way that when your repository is reading it, it could recognize, well, this was a V1 meeting, so I have to display it this way. This was a V2 meeting, so I have to display it this way. And you just would have code in to deal with both of it until eventually maybe you're completely converted over. Maybe you have a conversion process. I don't know.
Right. And maybe it's one of those things you can, you convert it on read, right? When you pull it out of when you pull that thing out of the database before you're done with it. Oh, this is version 1. Let's go update it so it's version 2. Right. There's those kind of things. But I think the beauty of that is, unlike a SQL database that has a structured schema, and making changes to that schema requires, updating the tables and, SQL modify statements like that, or SQL update statements to change the tables. You can have within the same container a object that has one structure and an object that has another structure. It's up to, in doing that, there's some complexities. You got to make sure that your application can handle potentially not having properties that are not in the older versions, while making sure that the newer ones get read in a way that those are incorporated and processed as expected.
Right.
So
let's take a look at Yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
I think the net of all of that is that they can live side by side, right? I don't have to update everything that's in there.
Right.
But I think we want to try and get this as close to a stand, and that's why choosing something like this should get us many of the fields that we expect to be using in our application. So
yeah. So for us here, we think for sure that we need things like this particular thing has about, which is interesting. That's a subject, so we'll come back to that one. We need we need the actor, whoever is talking. Attendee. It's interesting that's right in here.
Right. There's a rating as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
Do we want to rate the sessions?
Right.
Maybe. So attendee is the important part is this here, right? It's the expected type, and in this case, it's an organization or a person. So that's where we were thinking of having a collection of everyone who said, "Hey, I want to attend," and then having some status in there whether they actually attended or not, as opposed to audience, which is a little different, which is like who's this intended for. So as we're leading up to the event, who are we trying to promote this to? Maybe it's a group, maybe it's developers, maybe something that might be related to, it might be a developer talk, but it might be a node talk versus a more of an Azure kind of architecture discussion, right? The audience is going to be different depending on the topic that's being discussed. I mean, unless we're just going to keep it general and say everything that comes out of this particular user group is always going to be this kind of an audience.
Yeah, and then they have a duration, end date. I think there's a start date further down.
Yeah, these are alphabetical
order. Yeah.
Attendance mode, is this offline or online?
Oh yeah.
Associates an event with the schedule. I don't know that we want to go down this path, because we don't really have for different months or different seasons, right? It's not like there's it's not like we have a season of events, right? Every month there's an event. That's kind of the way it runs.
Right. It could be overkill for us.
I think so.
It's status. Yes, we talked about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Status is going to be important. And actually, they have a type in there of event status, which is interesting.
So their event status type. So your event can have an event status type, and their enumeration includes event canceled, event moved online, event postponed, event rescheduled, and event scheduled, which I think is all pretty good. We have Interesting. I wonder for us what it means to say that we have an event that's like a draft. I don't know that event status type is the answer there, but we don't want to publish it yet. I know event scheduled is certainly seems close, but
Right.
but we could look at that one a little bit further. So,
Yeah.
but no, you're right. There's definitely a lot here that's interesting. Keywords, which of course isn't bad. Attendee capacity, that's interesting. Where it's going to be located, that's good. So
all those things. So do we want? And there's a lot here.
Yeah.
At least through that first section. So if we go back to here, I think what we're saying was that we probably don't need this one, the event schedule, because it's a little more complex than what we're doing. Yeah.
Right.
What we could do is just do a that. No, that's not working. Why is that not working? I can't do. That's a pipe, right?
It is. Yeah.
Why? Hang on. Where am I? Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, that's what I needed. Oop. All right. So I don't see anything in there that's a description, so we're going to keep that. We need an actor, which will be our speaker, so that's fine. Don't worry about ratings for now. We're going to keep that. And audience, we're going to keep so we know who this is for. Do we organization or a person? Composer. No, I think that's the first one we're going to drop. Secondary contributor. I am not sure.
So I think, a contributor could be. I don't know that it's something that we really need. I mean, because I think we believe that a second speaker we kind of see that as a sub event.
Right, which is how we'll probably drop those in. So even though we have an actor for this main event or the super event, it probably isn't going to get populated. Except for, it might mean something else for a super event for us, like who actually did the scheduling or what have you. Door times when doors open. I think that's important because I know for us, we have things that happen beforehand for people to come out. Duration is going to be important, although I think that's not something we're going to store in the database. It's something that we might store, present when the time comes. Schedule we're going to get rid of, so let's get rid of this. Alan raises a good question if you want to.
Oh, yes. Do we have a schedule? So I think we would like to. But so generally speaking, starting at around 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern time, at least that's the time. But I understand that your point is if we have standard days. And I totally get it. The big problem that happens for us is we've thought about scheduling them, and then almost inevitably, I think putting the schedule out there definitely means that one of us will get scheduled for something at work. Like that almost is a guarantee, to say like, hey, everybody, we're going to show. But I'm not, we're not giving up. I don't think it's fair to say we're not giving up on that. Just maybe not in position to do that yet.
Yeah. It is challenging, right? Because we both have work jobs, and we do this ahead of work because it's probably from our individual schedules the best time that we can do this. And so I try. I know the way I look at this, there are certain days that I know I can do it. I know I try and do something Monday and try to do something Friday because those are days I don't have customers, and those are pretty much consistent. I'd like to do one more during the week, but that again, I fear. Although we scheduled it that way in the past, it happens when I do schedule one of these and I have a customer day that I wind up still being in that panic mode of being ready for a customer the morning of, and it's hard. And I just wind up saying, I think I've gotten to the point where I'm saying if I'm leading a customer thing, I'm not doing this. So
I think Alan is saying, just tell them to watch this. They'll learn heaps. I think that's I appreciate it. That's really kind. Sometimes I feel like, did we accomplish anything today?
I know. Here we are 10 minutes too, and we're still going through a discussion of what fields we want to include, right? But I think it's for those who like to, as you mentioned at the beginning, like to listen, because they're walking or running or whatever, instead of watching. This is the show for you.
Well, hopefully. There was a little bit of silence staring at things. But, some of the other things in here that I don't think we probably are looking at right now are, even though sometimes meetings are sponsored, I don't know if we need that in here today. It's so easy for people to say like, oh, I need everything, but I don't know that we necessarily do. It could always be added later. And besides, when you think about it, meetings being sponsored, in fact, if I recall correctly, there is an upcoming meeting being sponsored, and on the site, it just simply is part of the description text. So,
oh wow, okay,
I think that's true. And so the meetings are, you're not sunk if everything isn't supported, day one. But let's see, because in July, the speaker that's coming, talking about, he came last year. It was a very popular talk about AI. Just right there in the description, it says refreshment sponsored by, right? So the fact that it's not structured data isn't the most important thing, I think, there. That doesn't mean you should ignore it as part of your conversations, like when a group is, when you're figuring out, hey, what do we want to have in our data model? But maybe also prioritizing it, going, are we really going to support this just so that it's not used 11 or 12 months out of the year? And then if suddenly it was like, oh my gosh, every meetup is being sponsored by someone, and we should have that be part of the structured data so that it gets picked up by something, then okay, fine, add the feature, right? What is it that I got from? I'm trying to think of the years ago. I learned this from Raymond Chen, who is a legend at Microsoft for his work on Windows and his blog, The Old New Thing.
Consistently putting out a post every day or every other day at work.
Oh gosh, for decades.
Every time I go through the stream, he's been consistently now still. So
for decades he has been. There's a post a day on the Old New Thing, and he has a saying: all features are unimplemented by default. So, because people will ask, like, I can't. And I hear this all the time, like, I can't believe Microsoft hasn't done this. Why haven't they done this? And his answer is usually, well, all features are unimplemented by default, right? So it may not be that, because it may be that they have thought of it as well, and it's on the backlog, but constantly being beaten in the priority race.
Yeah.
So,
So I'd gone through and completed some things. So yes, we're going to keep, what language we're doing this in. Is it accessible for free? We're going to keep keywords. We're going to keep location, obviously, and maximum attendee capacity so that we can start to count down. I think where I start to question is, do we need a differentiation between physical and virtual attendees? We used to. I don't. I don't know that we still do.
Yeah. If you want to say that, like, we could hang on to maximum physical attendance, we could hang on to that, because I agree with you. There is a space limit at the meeting site, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we ever said, like, okay, well, this is also going to be hosted somewhere else, we don't know that we would have a cap on a virtual attendee, not
Right.
that we can think of. So again, doesn't necessarily need to be implemented.
Yeah. Agreed. So a couple more here because we're seeing that list. That list is not. So let's get through to here, and we should be fine because we're kind of coming up on 9:00 in the East Coast. So false offers. An offer to provide this item, for example, an offer to sell a product, rent the DVD. I don't think that's something we want to do.
Yeah.
Organizer. Yep, we need that. Performer. We're gonna go with actor and not performer, right? Or do we want to go performer, not actor? Because I don't think we need both.
I feel like maybe boy, this is really splitting hairs. So their definition of actor is an actor they say an actor, individual or a group, in TV, radio, movie, video games, etc., or in an event. Actors can be associated with an individual item or a series. So, I wonder if an event could have an actor, but that actor is not necessarily a performer. Like, for example, what if it's a meet and greet for an actor in a series, but they're not there to perform. They're just there to meet fans. They're not there to actually speak. They're just there to meet their fans. Whereas a performer is there to do something there. And in our case, the speaker.
Right. So, but the weird part is that.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Right. A performer at the event. For example, a presenter, musician, musical group, or actor. So they gave us a little stronger of an answer there, I think. For example, a presenter.
Mm-hmm. So we probably should be using performer instead of actor.
Yeah, probably.
Let's do true here. Let's go back up to the top, and then let's get false on that. Okay.
Yeah. So just for people maybe who were listening, the schema for event has both actor and performer, and we're trying to split hairs here on which one did you mean. And I came up with the idea of that the event might be about something that you're an actor in, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are performing at it.
Right.
I suppose. I don't know. Previous start date. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I think we should, because we do have cancellations and move the dates around. So
right. So previous start date used in conjunction with the event status if you were to reschedule or cancel an event. It's amazing to think how these folks have thought of everything. While you're still working on that, let me ask this other question. I'm curious what you're thinking before you finish. So this question's from Alan. Do you guys use code gens? And then I think the corollary is and believe in them, not source kind. Like I think, for example, you're maybe we're getting away from the AI conversation, but things like a T4 template.
Yeah. It's been forever since I've used those a T4 kind of template.
Like so maybe, I think that that it's one of those inertia things where should your organization go beyond having your developers use file new project and then fill in a bunch of boilerplate? The answer is probably yes. In fact, our good friend Danny Diaz, I remember talking with him over a decade ago And one of the things he said to me was, and it was at a workplace that was a contract workplace, meaning constant small projects. So here's a place that actually is hitting file new project more often than you might at your workplace. You could work at a place for 10 years and never do file new project or new item because the project's built, right? You're just maintaining it. And he had said, you know, you really should have a project template that gets everything out of the way that your organization uses every time, or even if they use it 80% of the time and all you just have to do is really remove it, or maybe turn that into a new item template of some kind. And this was a long time ago. So we're talking before frameworks like Blazor and so on. So I think it's underutilized, but you know, it's really hard, I think, to get right at an architectural level, that it almost becomes easier to not do it and then just say, well, you know, the next time there's a new project started, we'll make sure they follow all the standards. And those standards are just in documentation form.
Yeah. I mean, the other way that might be helpful with that, and granted, it is I think it's only in GitHub. But GitHub repos will let you create a project template that would have all of that documentation and all of the structure and whatever it is that you're looking for. Now, it's not to the level of a T4, but it certainly is a you know, like you said, you know, if we're at the point of, you know, kind of running through and doing those things and doing this all through documentation, then that might be a way to handle that.
Yeah, I mean, the advantage, and I know we're picking on T4, but using it as the example, the advantage there is that this is a runtime usable object that can fill in, you know, it's a template, so you can provide it with some information and it can fill it in to kind of get you going. And part of it, I think, is the investment in that people say, oh, well, now I have to learn something. And because now you got to learn a thing that doesn't feel like it's useful out of solving this one problem. And then do you go beyond, I think, just the new project and start thinking about how, well, when it's time to add things to the project, because you can have templatization for more than just the project. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Visual Studio and T4, just you're adding a new item. Okay, well, this item is something we do standard here, so we have some code gen for it. I think it's often ignored, and some of it is that us as developers tend to feel that it's easy to feel like if you didn't build it, then how do I know that it's okay? But yet at the same time, we use frameworks. We use common frameworks. So the way we think about things is interesting, I think, as developers. I would be willing to say that probably there were times that automated generation of things, whether it's just code or templates or so on, is useful. Another person I'm going to bring up is our good friend Jess Chadwick, who when I worked with him, spent a lot of time on trying to build out. His tool of choice was NuGet, was building out NuGet packages that you simply include it. It has great defaults and automatically connects to services for you, so that you don't even have to think about it. And then, okay, well, now I've got to go beyond the defaults, and you know, he would make it extensible from that point of view. But I remember a lot of his NuGet packages to do something like, for example, I'm trying not to get too much in the nitty gritty of what a specific project was, but perhaps it was very common to build projects that were put on screens at conferences. And then what would happen is attendees would come up and scan their badge, and auto-magically would get added to different mailing lists. That was being added over and over and over manually by the developers, cutting and pasting for sure. But then you got to cut and paste and glue it together. And he just rolled it all into a NuGet package. He was just like, it's just done. Everything works. Uses our standard. It uses the standard barcode scanner. It uses the standard whatever. And then you had the event where it's like, oh, they're not using the standard barcode scanner. Fine. Then tell it where the instance is that knows how to read that data, and it'll just swap it out. But it has good defaults. That is not the same thing as code generation. That was his tool of choice, you know. And look, Jess talked about NuGet, right? Like that was a big a big point. So Jess's ears are ringing now, I'm sure. But he's a good friend of ours, and I did a podcast with him years ago. We used to do the Static Void podcast years and years ago when .NET Core was a twinkle and it was brand new. And we were having shows about, like, is this going to be? Is this going to happen? Is this going to work? Is this really going to be a thing?
Those were good shows. It was a good group discussion.
Well, thank you. But those were fun times. Todd Snyder and Jess Chadwick. So in any case, yeah. So we would like to be back later in the week, I think, implementing a lot of this and getting it to where we can start adding events. And then we need to have a pattern to add attendees so that you can RSVP for this stuff. And then we're going to hit the big milestone, I think, with authentication. And because that way with authentication, then Rich and I and other people can create events and not just anybody coming to the site.
That's the important part, right? You got to keep the security bits got to be, underlying all the stuff we're doing here. So
I think this is cool. I asked because I've written one that uses behavior definitions. Maybe I should share. The idea of generating the finished code out of a document that is usable by the business. I think that's a good idea. And it's just so funny that you're talking about that, because I was sort of getting my brain wrapped around BDD just last night, in fact, behavior-driven development, and how I think tools from that are underutilized. The idea that instead of this translation layer that we have at the business where, like, the product owner has to go ask the developers what it does, instead of just having something they can both look at and the developers can tell you, yes, we've implemented that, and the product owners can say, yes, they've implemented that because it's in the document. And having that generated one way or the other, whether it goes this way or that way, is probably important. Otherwise, you don't trust the document anymore, because the first thing you're going to do when you open it is say, I'm not sure if this is up to date.
Right.
That's the first thing you're going to say. I'm not sure if it's up to date. So, all right.
Yeah.
So in any case, good Monday, I guess, to everyone. Although Monday is wrapping up, I believe, for Alan. So, maybe he could let us know how Tuesday goes. I always make the joke too, because I've actually, there are some other folks in that time zone or area of time zones that sometimes I'll see online, and I'll make the joke of be like, it might be later in the day here, so it's already Tuesday, and I'll say, so hey, let me know how Tuesday what's the future look like, right?
Right.
So
time
how's
travel.
Tuesday going to be? But it's not. It doesn't work that way.
No. If only.
Yeah, I think that's cool, Alan. Would love to see your thoughts on that and see some examples. That's great. All right. So 9:05. Do you want me to handle the lead out? Okay.
I'm gonna take what we did here, though. Save this document, check it in, and tag it post show, and then there's a branch that we're doing called data modeling. So that's where you'll see this, and we're just gonna continue to iterate on this as we go through the next couple shows.
Yep. All right. Well, awesome, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for all the comments in the chat there, Alan. It's always great to hear from you. And we certainly, I can't tell you how many times he's rescued us in the middle of using some of these tools. So we appreciate that. And everybody else, you can always catch us. If you're watching us now on YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button if you like what we're doing, and leave a comment if you have any questions or your own experiences. That's always helpful too. And so for Rich, I'm Chris, and we will see you next time on the Dev Talk Show.